So please help me welcome Jill Henderson.
A very giant theme of inclusion, which is a huge field, which actually encompasses probably about 5 or 6 other giant fields inside it. So this is really the tip of the iceberg in so many ways. To talk this morning for 20 minutes on something that is very dear to my heart. It's one of the reasons why I became an artist, one of the reasons that I began working in marketing communications was something that happened when I was quite young, and it happened in Scotland, and I know we have some Scottish in the house. Hey, Scotland. When I was about 4 years old in Scotland, I went to a museum. My parents brought me, and there was an art activity of making in one of the galleries, inside the gallery, like with little chairs, and we made little peg dolls from clothes pegs, and I remember the whole experience so vividly, and that experience has stayed with me. And the facilitators were young women who were possibly volunteers, but that gesture planted a seed in my young brain and let me basically understand that that space was mine, that museum was space for me. So it was very important and something that stayed with me. So when we're talking about inclusion and accessibility, it's everybody, it's all of us. And I'm sure all of you in the room probably have some experience of either being made to feel welcome in a museum or an institution, or not being made to feel welcome. So I'm hoping it's the first one and not the latter. But so, and I think those first initial connections to cultural museums or galleries, or whether it's in the arts, it's so important. So I wanted to begin actually just this as a work by Jeffrey Gibson, and he is a part Cherokee artist who is based in Chicago, United States. And this is a part of a work. It's called In Numbers Too Big to Ignore. And it's a detail, and then I'll read the materials: glass beads, copper jingles, metal studs, repurposed wool army blanket. I wanted just to open with this because I really love that statement. All are welcome. So it's something that we write all the time. If you're creating an event and you put all are welcome, and you think, okay, that's it, I'm done. I've just invited, everybody, and that's all I need, as far as I need to go. And that's a fantastic first start, because that's an invitation, and that invitation is so crucial. But again, it is such a big statement just to put all are welcome, and we're good, we're done here. It's so much more than that can be done. So as I started to look at inclusion and started to think about it, I started to think about the artists that I've worked with over the years that I feel are actively involved in making some changes, rethinking what we think about, or how we think about inclusion, how we think about accessibility. And one of those artists is an artist called Carmen Papalia, and he is he's legally blind artist, but he instead of that, he has changed his outlook and his naming of himself to call himself a non-visual artist and learner. And he is a performance artist, firstly, but he's also a writer, and he has created a lot of writings that go perhaps an anti-policy methodology towards accessibility, which is really, instead of creating rules and regulations in terms of facilities and buildings and accessibility, he has created something called the 5 main tenets of open access. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. But first I wanted to talk a little bit and show you a little bit about what Carmen does in his art practice. So this is one quote from him that I really, really like, which I think for me is sort of a theme that I'd like to keep going back to. And basically it's, let's try thinking of accessibility as a creative long-term process. It's not just about the built environment, but about ideas of agency and power. So for me, that agency and power is a key. So there's Carmen. He is in the middle of a marching band. So this is an artwork that he created while in residency at Santa Clara in California at the Grand Central Art Center. And what he did here, what's happening here, is he engaged the services of a high school marching band and worked with them and the band leader to create sounds that they would play that would describe the street and the road and the immediate walking conditions that are ahead of him. So what is actually happening is that marching band is replacing his white cane. A lot of what Carmen does is he really turns the tables on our thinking around accessibility and around partially sighted and blind, all sorts of disabilities. In another series of the similar series where he replaces his white cane, as he calls it, he went to the Victoria and Albert Museum and worked with a BBC Foley sound artist who created sound effects, and he walked with that sound artist around the painting and sculpture galleries in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and that sound artist created sounds to interpret and describe the paintings and sculptures that were in the gallery. So his work has really been shown, as you can see, from the Guggenheim Museum to the Tate to Harvard Art Museums, and a lot of his anti-policy, open access thinking, and really a lot of what he's doing is sort of turning the tables a little bit and having us rethink ourselves and how we sense, how we use our senses. The five tenets of open access has been adopted by many museums around the world. So here's Carmen, again in another work. This is Guiding String, and Guiding String was at the Model Contemporary Art Museum in Sligo, Ireland. And he tied the strings in the museum so he could find his preferred ways around the building. So for instance, from his favorite chair in the coffee shop to the bookshop to the galleries, this red string would guide him. So the red string was left there. So essentially it was a great tool for him and helped him, but for all of the rest of the visitors, the majority of the rest of the visitors, it was something they had to walk over, navigate around, step over, wonder why it was there, etc., etc. And this is another, Carmen also is really quite well known for a lot of the walks that he does. So this is an urban walk where he has probably like 100 so fully sighted persons behind him, who the instruction is that they close their eyes and put a hand on the shoulder of the person in front. And he will do an hour walk around urban areas. So one thing that he realized that the qualifier non-visual just helped him stop feeling like someone who was blind. And I soon realized, this is him speaking, I soon realized that I had access to entire unseen bodies of knowledge from his position, from the other senses and the other knowledge that he had. I learned that many of my non-visual friends had never set foot in a museum. They didn't think that there would be anything there for them to do. And even when there was, usually in the form of specially programmed touch or descriptive tour, it was a poor consolation for the privileged visual art experience. This is another work that he works a lot with the symbol of the white cane. So this is a giant white cane that he made. He's also made amplified white cane with a sound system as he walks. And he's also worked with other museums around the world to bring all of these devices and strategies into the museum. So what are museums doing? And I'm talking about museums because it's something that I know art museums, creative, but this can really apply to creative spaces, theater spaces, dance spaces, any kind of cultural activity or cultural space where you're working with members of the public. So some of the accessibility best practices that I found looking at, number one is parking. Seems relevant for Calgary. Specifically also drop-off and pick-up locations. This is talking about accessibility and barrier-free access. So another interesting one, magnifying glasses, which I think is a fantastic idea. Captions and videos, ASL interpreters, sensory rooms, noise-cancelling headphones. A lot of museums are doing this now for autism sufferers, service animals, and we have, hello Piper. And lifelong learner tours, and also tours for individuals with Alzheimer's, free Wi-Fi, everyone loves. And then also audio apps and different kinds of sensory and touch tours. And I think a lot of us are probably familiar now, like a lot of those things are kind of the new normal in a sense in museums, especially in big museums like perhaps the Met or the ROM, for example, in Canada. So the other things I found at the ROM, which was interesting, just looking at their accessibility, which is actually notably, the ROM has been working on this since 2005. So they've been really quite ahead in this thinking. So the other interesting things that the ROM does is they have visitor tours for tours for visitors with dementia, something called a Magnus Cards app for visitors with autism, sensory tours, lots of different assistive technologies. This is what the Guggenheim is doing, is something called Mind's Eye programs. And actually, Carmen has worked with them as well with some performances and programs. So these are workshops for visitors who are blind or have low vision, and they work with staff from the museum, and they have visual description, conversation, sensory experiences. And this is the project that Carmen did with the Guggenheim, as you can recognize probably the Guggenheim, and the famous terrazzo floor there. And what he did with them was actually work on a project where it was one-on-one experiences and not necessarily basically it was open to everybody. So he had, was talking about and introducing normal everyday visitors who would sign up to this one-on-one experience where they would touch and feel parts of the museum, like the floors and would feel the vibrations in the air. And it was really a full sensory tour for everybody. This is also looking at more museums about what other museums are doing in the States. What really jumped out at me was the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. So the High Museum of Art in Atlanta realized that their local community was a population of 45% persons of color, and that those persons of color were not coming to the museum at all. So they decided they had to do a complete top to bottom overhaul. And what they did was they got all the staff together and had numerous discussion sessions, and they came up with different ideas on ways to include more diversity, first in the collections, and then what they decided to do was add 9 major diverse exhibitions in one calendar year. So they did a very big overhaul of the curatorial direction. The staff also all came together and created the tagline, "Here for You." They also decided that all of their programs events would have a live ASL interpreter at them. So there's a number of those different strategies, and you can kind of see what actually resulted in happening was they grew their attendance by 45% in 1 year, which is enormous. And also you can see it throughout even just their website. They just created a space of inclusion. And another example from the States, again, Lacma, Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art. And what Lacma decided to do was, while their building was being renovated on Wilshire Boulevard, they came up with a few other ideas. But it was, I think, also something they were thinking of doing anyway. And that is they decided to expand and have a satellite museum in South Central. And yes, essentially, if the residents of LA's most disadvantaged neighborhoods struggle to come to the museum, then Lacma will bring the museum to them. So they purchased this 84,000 square foot warehouse space in South LA. And I just wanted to go back a little bit and talk about, I worked at the Contemporary Art Gallery in Vancouver for 9 years. And one of the projects that are dear to my heart there was the Multilingual Tours that I started back in 2008. And we initiated, primarily my personal reason for beginning those tours was I wanted to hear other languages spoken. And I wanted to include and reach out to people who are comfortable in those other languages, that was their language, and for them to come and hear about the exhibitions in their language and to be welcomed. This was over 10 years ago now. It was 11 years ago in 2008, and we began with French and Spanish, and then we added Mandarin, Japanese, German, Farsi, Korean, and a lot of the tours were, the languages were chosen or added relating to the exhibition content. So these tours are very informal tours, and they really were in the form of discussions. And a lot of museums around the world, or galleries or institutions, cultural institutions, have been looking at providing resources in multilingual resources, right? Multiple languages. And a lot of what they found, the practical ways to do this, have been to immediately make use of the staff on hand, the team that works in the museum or gallery or organization already, and build from there. So it's not really the case that you need to immediately start with all the languages at once. You can begin with just 1 or 2 languages and then build resources from there. What is interesting is that there is a lot of media interest in providing tours in other languages, which was a bit of a surprise to me, but was very welcome. The Cultural Access Pass, I'm sure quite a few people in this room are probably aware of what Cultural Access Pass is. So back to Canada. So this is something that Canada is doing where no other country in the world has such a program. So effectively, Cultural Access Pass is a program that's run by the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. And since its introduction in 2008, more than 300,000 people have participated in the program. So new citizens are, after the ceremony, are given a form or a way to register. And for 1 year, you have free access to all museums, parks, historical sites across Canada. And it's really grown now where there's also discounts on Via Rail and all sorts of other fantastic things as part of the program. So to date now, there's 1,400 cultural spaces that are participating in the program, and 6,000 each year in Calgary participate in the program. Up to 4 children can come with the parents on each visit. So this is basically completely free for a whole year to all art museums. Truth and Reconciliation calls to action number 67. For museum and archives. We call upon the federal government to provide funding to the Canadian Museums Association to undertake collaboration with Aboriginal peoples, a national review of museum policies and best practices to determine the level of compliance with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to make recommendations. Another part of the recommendations were to create collaborative projects with Aboriginal peoples in museums and cultural galleries and art galleries and institutions. One project that I would like to mention is with an artist that I think is one of the most incredible artists operating in in the world today, to be honest. She's a fantastic artist, is Rebecca Belmore. And she's an artist from Winnipeg. And this is a piece that she did specifically. I wanted to look at this work in terms of how Rebecca worked with the Canadian Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg. This project is called Trace. And as she states here, trace exists between the individual and the community. What it pulls together is the idea that we are a people, we all belong to a shared community. In the stripy shirt in the center is Rebecca Belmore. And she is, basically what she decided to do is she created a blanket, a giant blanket made out of clay beads. And the clay is red clay from the river and from the land underneath where the museum was built. And she rented this temporary studio space and invited students from the high schools and all members of the public to come in and work with her and create all of the clay beads. So it was tremendously successful, and all members of the public and high school students and everyone participated in Winnipeg and made these clay beads. And as she eloquently states, that the beauty of the piece is that it goes beyond Indigenous people. It is about all people who came to live in this place. Now, coming back a little bit to Calgary, this is a project in a sense that actually accidentally happened and reached out and brought and included teenagers in an unexpected way. It was not planned. So Kapwani Kiwanga, a wall is just a wall and nothing more at all, was an exhibition at Esker Foundation, February 3rd to May 6th, 2018. And part of that exhibition, there was a work called Pink Blue, which there's a couple of images there on the right. And I'll explain a little bit about Pink Blue. Pink Blue is an artwork that's interactive artwork, which is in the form of a long corridor with two doors at each end, one at each end. The first section is actually painted white, and there are fluorescents that have blue filters on them. So that's what creates like the blue color. The second section is painted pink with white fluorescent lights. Fairly simple. Not quite that simple. The pink is a very specific pink. It's Baker Miller pink. Now, this paint was originally created in the 60s and was first used in Seattle in a Navy prison. And it's named Baker and Miller after the prison's directors. And this pink is, I think, maybe some people know about this pink, but this pink is supposed to reduce heart rate and aggressive behavior. And it was used in prisons, it was used in sports teams' locker rooms to make the opposite sports team less aggressive. So the pink was supposed to calm inmates, and what they actually found was it does the opposite. It calms them for 15 minutes, and then after 15 minutes you start scraping the walls and scraping the paint up, so it actually has the opposite effect. So that's what the pink is. The blue, the fluorescent, are lights that are used often to prevent intravenous drug use. And they're often, you see them in the washrooms and bars or nightclubs or in parkades or parking and things like that. And they were supposed to prevent, but actually what they do is create more unsafe conditions and are quite dangerous, because it just means it doesn't stop the intravenous drug use, of course. It just pushes those people to other places, or it causes more damage when they do. So essentially, that's a little bit of a description of the work. And what artist Kapwani Kiwanga is doing is talking about spaces and how design spaces affect us, and questioning how architects and designers create spaces that will manipulate our behavior or exclude certain people. So this piece, Pink Blue, unexpectedly to us at Esker, basically went viral and became a venue for Instagram on a huge scale, and took off in a giant way. Over the run of the exhibition, we doubled our attendance, and we saw basically each day about 200 young Calgarians coming in of every kind, and spending long time in the museum, in the gallery, which was fantastic and amazing. But also was a little stressful to sort of maintain this kind of onslaught in that way. But it was really intensely beautiful and incredible how everybody that came, young, old, you can see babies, children, and the teens, and specifically the teens, would come with different outfits. They'd come with bags with different outfits. They would, everybody, from all different kinds of people, all different kinds, lesbian, bi, gay, trans, everyone was welcome, of course, and it became a safe space to present yourself and to be photographed and photograph yourself or be with your friends and put all those photos on Instagram. The activity of the selfies began in Pink Blue, but it actually spread, and every single artwork was selfies and posing and doing different things in front of. So it was kind of incredible to see that just go viral. But then also with the teenagers coming into the gallery, they would be there for 2-3 hours, and they would take about 100 photos of themselves with each artwork, like literally each artwork in the whole exhibition. So it was quite incredible and wonderful to talk with also the teens coming in and asking them, have you ever been here before? And they'd be, no. Have you been to the Glenbow Museum? No. Have you been to any other museums? No. And there was actually a few teens that made a video of themselves traveling to Esker, taking 3 different trains and 1 bus, and coming, and it became this pilgrimage almost, in a weird selfie Instagram pilgrimage. So it led to a lot of discussion, especially between artists and between the staff, and also in Canadian art as well, in a sense, where we talked about what about the art selfie, There's been some sort of, when you talk about selfies and stuff, people kind of start to roll their eyes. And one writer that sort of contradicted some of that is Mary Garages. And she talked about how actually this is a way to position, a way to claim, and a way to take space for Black people, Indigenous people, people of color. And essentially, that is exactly what we saw with the youth and the teens, but it became quite an incredible experience for everyone at the gallery, and continues to be. It has basically doubled our attendance for the year. So, because one of the things leading from this is we started to work with youth groups, and we took cues also from the content makers, as I like to call them, who were giving themselves the power and agency in an art gallery, and taking that place which is normally or has seen to be a privileged place and making it theirs. I wanted to end again on a quote from Carmen and Whitney Mashburn and Carmen Papalia. Meaningful inclusion necessitates investment in long-term interpersonal relationships between artists, institutions, curators, educators, publics, and surrounding communities. The interrelationships of the individuals within a space define the accessibility of that place. And these relationships are a product of lasting intentional care. In the privileged arena of the museum, a radically new order can be created through a series of commitments that transfer value from objects to people, both as audience members and content creators. And I think with all of this successful strategies or ways that museums and institutions around the world are paying attention and working to create. Basically is about creating that power and agency and having audience members be also content creators. And for me, the also interesting thing about what he says here is the transfer value from objects to people is a new role in museums. So I also wanted just to end on Carmen Papalia's 5 tenets of open access. So it relies on those who are present, is the first one, in terms of looking for support and finding support and trust. It's a radically different than a set of policies that are enforced. It's a root system of embodied learning. It disrupts the disabling conditions that limit one's agency and potential to thrive, and is a temporary, collectively held space where participants can find comfort in disclosing their needs and preferences with one another. That's it.